in the fire. I think like most boys and most guys, it's pyromaniacs. Some girls are, I know, but I think it seems like stereotypically anyway, boys love to play with fire. And I loved, that's past tense, I love to play with fire, still do. I can sit and just stare at a fire and watch the flames and watch how a log burns or watch bugs crawling out of the logs get burned. And, I kind of enjoy that. I was kind of one of those kids, I remember with my cousins, we'd take magnifying glass and get ants. A little bit twisted, I know, but I like fire, always have. My mom and dad would say they knew when I kind of graduated from the house and wasn't around the house as much because the ditches around the property stopped getting burned because I was always going out and burning the ditches. That was just kind of my thing. I enjoy fire. But I think I have a healthy respect for fire. I mean, I'm assuming we've all been burned a little bit by fire. You get a little too close to the campfire, putting a log in or something, you get burned pretty quick. Becky and I were having a bonfire. We were burning some brush out at our house and a couple weeks ago, and I got a little too close and I burned all the hair off my arm. It's kind of one of those quick things that just happened. When I was probably, 8 or 9, maybe 10 years old, there was a 3-year-old boy in our church who was killed by a fire. Then when I was in high school, there was an entire family. I knew a family of 6, 4 girls, mom and dad, were killed in a house fire. Becky and I's house caught on fire last year. So I think I have a healthy respect for fire. So there's this love-hate relationship that we have with fire. Fire can be a good thing. Fire can be a beneficial thing. When we were out west a couple different times on vacation, we saw some wildfires, and we know about the fire that's burning out in California. But we saw some wildfires. We saw evidence of wildfires one time we were in Wyoming, South Dakota. The other time we were in Colorado. And fire is an interesting thing. I don't know if you've seen forest fires. We see this path where it was like everything was burned, and then all of a sudden there's this patch of green in the middle of the forest fire where the fire just kind of parts and goes around it, kind of comes back together. Fire is just an interesting thing. It's kind of a weird thing. There's a line in a movie. Remember the movie Backdraft? Back in the 80s, 90s, I think. I don't remember when it was, but Backdraft. And they're trying to catch this arsonist. And the older guy is trying to teach the younger guy about how to study fire and how to catch the arsonist. And the old guy says, "Why does the fire burn this way?" Because it wants to. Fire is an interesting thing. But fire also has a lot of benefits, right? Have you ever been to a blacksmith shop or something, the historical tours, and you see that, about smelting, about forging metal, that fire is required, that fire is essential to life. It's essential to making the things that we have. And when fire is controlled and when fire is purposeful, fire is beneficial. Fire is helpful. Fire shapes. Fire molds. Fire helps create. It doesn't just always destroy. It reveals things from time to time. It's one of the things we learned when we're out west talking to forest rangers. They said that most of the fires out west, they watch, but they don't fight unless it gets next to homes or towns or it's going to do some damage like that. They let them burn because it burns all the brush. There are some trees, some pine trees, that the fire actually releases the seeds in the cone. The cones will sit there, the seeds in the cone, for years until a fire comes and opens the cones up and the seeds drop out and new growth happens. So fire is incredibly beneficial and incredibly helpful. We're going to look at a story this morning. Probably you are all familiar, even if you don't attend church much or you're not familiar as a child, you've probably heard the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the fiery furnace, or as VeggieTales, you have Rack, Shack, and Benny. Anybody have seen VeggieTales, the Rack, Shack, and Benny version? We're going to read about Rack, Shack, and Benny this morning. It's all of chapter 3 is what we're going to read, so it's a little bit longer of a section, but it gives you the fuller picture of what's happening in this story. Okay, so we're going to read in Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3, we're going to read the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. Massive thing. If you could drive around and see the big blue silos, a lot of those are 90 feet tall. So that's about how big this statue was. Sent it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to all the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted out, "People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of all of these instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews, a bunch of tattletales. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king," sucking up. "You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of these instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. And that's hyperbole. Technology didn't exist to get the furnace up to 5,000-6,000 degrees, okay? Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed, in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god." Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell the smoke. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trust in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no God who can rescue like this." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. So here is this story. These guys, I don't know what you think about when you think of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel and these people. If you go back and you read earlier in Daniel, you'll see that these are children, literally. That the Hebrew word actually means child. And it could be anything from infancy up through adolescence. So they could have been babies. They could have been up to, adolescence, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. So there's this kind of window of age that they would have taken all of the strong, all of the healthy, all of the ones who would have been good slaves, who could have been teachable, who could have been of service to the kingdom of Babylon. So they took them all. So these guys were pretty young when they were taken. Because of the story, we can make some assumptions that when they were taken, they were old enough to ask for a vegetarian diet. Now, I don't know about you, I don't know too many 8, 9, 10-year-old boys who'd say, "Feed me broccoli, I don't want hot dogs and burgers." But that's what they do. They ask for this special diet. So then they get trained for 3 years. And so this encounter happens sometime subsequent to this 3-year training. So if you go back, you can see that these young guys were trained for 3 years to be educated, whether it was language, whether it was the polity, the politics of the day, how the system worked, indoctrinated, whatever. So they were probably, I'm guessing, most scholars would agree that they're probably in the age of 10 to 15, something like that. I know we got any like 10 to 15-year-old kids in here. Most of them are down in junior church. We got a couple in here, got a few over here. We got 3. Yeah, you boys just stand up. You in the 10 to 15 range? Here's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego right here. We got them in service this morning. Thank you. So this is the age of Shadrach, Meshach. These guys are not men yet. And we think that, they were men. They were able to stand up to the king. No, these were snot-nosed boys. They're like, "No, king, we ain't doing it." Now notice that they're always respectful. They were respectful to the king. They were respectful to the process, but they made it very clear. I love how it says here. And verses 15 and 16 and 17. "We want you to know, O king, that we aren't going to do this. We want it to be very clear to you that this is how we're going to live." Now, if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if these guys were probably in the 12 to 15-year age at this time, when they had been taken, they would have been in the 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, depending on age, right? By the age of 13, Jewish boys had the first 5 books of the Bible memorized. By the age of 13. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They would have had most of that memorized. They took this word with them. And so as they're being indoctrinated, as they're being taught, as they're going through this 3-year process, even the food that they eat, they remember the teaching of the Bible that would have been their Bible and the prophets. They would have memorized some of that as well. By the age of 13, they had 5 books of the Bible nearly memorized. How many of us can quote 5 verses? Don't raise your hand. These guys knew God's word and were familiar with who God was. And I love this idea that, king, boss, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, we're going to serve God. Doesn't matter what you say, doesn't matter what you do. This is how we're going to live. I got a couple pictures of what they were facing. This is kind of a couple of the images I pulled up. Now, obviously, we don't have the actual image of the furnace or anything, but this is a furnace. So it's not just a little wood stove or anything like that. Now, obviously, this one isn't quite as ancient as what would have been scripturally would have been here, but technology hasn't changed much. The same process that we use for melting and for fire and for molding metal is the same process. But this is a hundreds of year old furnace. So you can see you can kind of see to the side there on the left side, you can see grass on the back of this. There's a ramp that you actually put material in the top. So if you look close enough, there's a shadow there, you can see there's a sheep in the opening of that door there. And there's a couple of sheep in there. So it gives you a little bit of scale to see that there's sheep there. So when Nebuchadnezzar is watching, he's looking, he can see into the furnace. He can see the size of this furnace. He can see people walking around. Here's another more ancient picture of a furnace complex. Hopefully you can see it well enough. But these pictures are coming. There we go. So you can see this ancient complex. So on the left side of the picture, you can see the big hole in the ground. Those are bellows. So those are big, huge bellows they pump into the furnace to get the furnace hot so that it actually melt the metal. So this is a huge complex that these guys are looking at that Nebuchadnezzar could walk around, and all the people could walk around where they would walk up and throw them in the top of the furnace. So you can see where the bellows are. You can see where the remnants of the furnace are to the side there and how big these things were. And Nebuchadnezzar is standing there watching them getting thrown in. The interesting thing is that Nebuchadnezzar wanted to watch them burn. He wanted to watch these little kids, these 15, 13, 12-year-old kids burn. He could stand and he could see, remember that first picture, he could see into the furnace. He could see what was going to happen. He wanted to watch them in pain. He was so angry. The words in the text here, when you come back up to verse 19, when it says his face became distorted with rage. In verse 13, it says Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage. These Hebrew words, the Aramaic words that translate, they actually have it's a physical rage, a physical anger. I don't know if you've ever seen anybody this angry before, but there is so much anger. He's throwing, he's breaking things. Like in verse 19, his face distorts. He is so angry that is in this rage that he wants to rip their limbs off himself. He is so mad that they don't worship him, that they said, "No, king." I mean, you don't tell kings no, right? I mean, it usually doesn't go well to tell a king no. I mean, sometimes it doesn't go well to tell your mom and dad no. I mean, your mom and dad may want to kill you, but they're not going to kill you. You know, that whole thing. I brought you into this world, I'm going to take you out. But a king literally could. A king could kill anybody he wanted for any reason. You just didn't tell kings no. And these young men, these 12, 13, 14-year-old men stand up and say, I know what's right. I know what's right, and I'm not going to do that, O king. Again, they're respectful, but they understand what is right. And one of the things I think we forget about in this story, I think we tend to focus on the miraculous. We tend to focus on these guys are thrown into the fire. We tend to focus on Nebuchadnezzar and this whole idol thing, and we look at the miracle of God delivering them. But the whole thing that got Nebuchadnezzar so upset and what got them thrown into the fire in the first place was worship. Was the discussion of who are you going to worship? Who are you going to honor? Who are you going to respect? The word worship here literally means to pay homage to. Homage is a public declaration. It is a public act. It is public behavior. It's not just words. It's not just lip service. It's not just, I will say this. I've read this story before, and I think, what was wrong? Why wouldn't they just bow to the statue? Why wouldn't they just give in? Why, what's the big deal? necessarily matter in the heart, right? If in my heart, I'm going to worship God, but just as an outward thing, I'm just going to kneel and I'm just going to pretend and I'm not really going to mean it. So I said, no. Because my behavior, because what I do, because of my outward expression, because of my outward behavior, it reveals my heart, and it reveals my passion, and it reveals my love. And, O King Nebuchadnezzar, it doesn't matter what you do to us. We will not bow our knee to you because we worship God. And that's the only person we pay homage to. That's the only person that our public appearance, that our public behavior, that we honor him. We don't honor you, King. So the whole crux of this story, everything around this centers on worship. And who are you going to worship? Who are you going to honor? Who are you going to physically live for? Who are you going to physically act towards? Is it God or is it this statue? Is it God or is it work? Is it God or is it family? Is it God or is it health? Is it God or is it children? Is it God or is it fill in the blank? Say that no matter what, our behavior, what we pay homage to, our worship, is a public acknowledgement, a public declaration, a public statement of our faith in what we believe. That goes to, all right, working on Sunday. Yeah, I'm going to start meddling. Working on Sunday. What we drink, how we talk. Do you act different because you're here? Do you act different because of what you wear? Do you act different because the place you're in, and then talk different when you leave this place? Do you talk different in the workplace? Do you talk different to your coworkers, to your employees, to your bosses? You come in here and, well, I can't lie, but then you go outside and like, well, yeah, it's just a white lie. Who do you worship? Who do you worship? What do you believe? How are you going to live your life? Because the Bible, the teaching of who Jesus is and the teaching of what it means to be a follower of his doesn't change depending on the day of the week. It doesn't change depending on your location. It doesn't change depending on your address. It doesn't change depending on who you're talking to and who you're interacting with. You see, one of the things these guys knew was the Bible. They knew what God expected, and they knew what God wanted them to do and how he wanted them to live. Do you? Who do you worship? Who do you pay homage to? Who do you publicly declare as the most important person in your life? By the way that you're living, by the way that you're acting, by the way that you're talking, by the places that you go, by the people you hang out with, by all the things of life. Now, I'm not saying it's inappropriate to hang out with anybody from all walks of life. Okay, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is what are you publicly declaring by the way that you live your life, not what you do in this room? See, I believe God puts us in the fire for a purpose. As we talked about, the fire reveals. Fire, we know that when, through the process of making iron or bringing gold out or silver out or precious metals out, fire is essential. Fire gets rid of the dross. It gets rid of the junk. It gets rid of the garbage. It gets rid of anything that keeps the valuable stuff from being used, from being retrieved. In the old, you can go back and Google some pictures of furnace. There's In the furnace, there's different paths that come out of the furnace. One that all the garbage flows out from, and the other one, the good stuff flows out from. Fire is the only thing that can separate that. You can pick up a hunk of rock. Have you ever been to like a gold mine or a silver mine or something like that? Anybody ever take tours of that? Some of you have. Some of you are saying yes. We've been on a couple of gold mine tours, and they hand us a rock. Like, you can see value in this? You know, it just looks like a rock to me, and you can kind of maybe see some little speckles in it, some little specks, and you're like, I don't get it. But now you put this under extreme heat. You put this through a process, and you chip away the rock, and you chip away the quartz, and you chip away this, and you chip away that. And all of a sudden, you're left with the valuable stuff. All the junk gets thrown one way, and all the valuable stuff you take and you cherish and you make beautiful jewelry out of and things like that. Can you see why God might want to put you through a fire? We all have junk in our lives. We all have garbage. We all have things that keep us from being who God wants us to be. And He looks at us and He sees the potential. He sees the person that He has created. He sees the good. He sees how He can be honored and glorified. And He sees the beauty in our life. But there sometimes has to be fire that we go through and that we experience to chip away the hard edges. Anybody else in here stubborn? I'm stubborn. Okay. Got a little reaction on that one. How many of you, the person next to you, is stubborn? Can you see how God would want us to put us through a fire to chip away at that? Because stubbornness can prevent us from being obedient to God. I've experienced that. I know that. You're like, God, no, I'm going to, I'm going to do this my way. I'm right. That He can put us through a fire in order to chip away the stubbornness, in order to chip away the hardness, and in order to chip away maybe cynicism, maybe skepticism, maybe the way we've been taught, the way we've been raised has been wrong. And then God puts us through the fire to chip some of that stuff away and to get that out of our lives so that we can be His better, more perfect, better useful, more valuable. That we can go through a fire, and fires aren't pleasant. We've all been burned. We've all experienced the hard times. We've all experienced the difficulty. We've all experienced the unfun part of fire. But we need to praise God and honor God for the fires that we go through, because we acknowledge and understand that it reveals more about our true character and who we are. Thank God for the fires of your life. Thank God for the hardships. Now, the things that you stress about, the things that you are worried about, can you see how maybe God may want to use a fire to chip some of that away? Why? Because fear is not something that God gives us. Worry is not something that God blesses us with. Those things interfere in our relationship with Him. And you can see why we might have to go through a fire to get some of that stuff out of our life, to chip some of that away so that we can be the people that we're supposed to be. That fires are beneficial. Fires are helpful and useful. But it all centers around the subject of worship. Who are you going to publicly acknowledge? Who are you going to publicly declare, and how you live your life? Do you come into church and you dress the part, you act the part, you look the part, you sing the part? Maybe you even carry your Bible, or you open the app on your phone. But Monday's coming. How do you act on Monday? How do you talk on Monday? Where do you go on Monday? What are the jokes you tell on Monday? Worship. Who are you going to publicly declare? Who are you going to publicly honor and say, you know what, boss? With all due respect, I'm not going to do that. With all due respect, I'm not going to fudge those numbers. With all due respect, I'm not going to work on Sunday. With all due respect, I'm not going to act that way. With all due respect, I'm not going to do that. Because it is not pleasing and is not honoring to my God. Because I know how he wants me to act, and I know how he wants me to behave. I know how he wants me to treat people, and I'm not going to do that. Employees, do you ask your employees to do things you know is not biblical? I don't know how many of you have employees, or children, neighbors. Well, I won't do it, but I'll ask you to do it. How are you publicly living your life? Verse 16, 17, and 18. I just love the response of these guys. Again, remember their age. The example that they are to us, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, facing this furnace, feeling the heat from this furnace, knowing exactly what their fate is if they refuse. And they say, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar." Can you just see the boyish, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves to you. Oh, boss. Oh, employees. Oh, union. Oh, I don't need to defend myself. I know who God is. I know what he's, and this is how I'm going to behave. And this is how I'm going to act. And this is what I'm going to do because I worship God. And if I lose my job, my God is still God and he'll provide. If I lose an account, if I lose on the bottom line, if I lose this bid, I don't have to defend myself to you because I know who my God is. And if you throw us into the blazing furnace, our God is able. Did you notice they say he is able? They didn't say he will. They didn't know what the outcome was going to be. They had no idea what the outcome was going to be. For all they could expect, they were going to die. They had never seen anybody. I mean, you can tell by how Nebuchadnezzar reacts that this has never happened before. You don't get thrown into a blast furnace and come walking out. They had no expectation other than death. They could see this complex. They knew what happens. There's no way. I mean, the guys who are walking them, you ever thought about this? The guys who are walking them to the furnace die, right? What do? They keep walking. Guys are dropping. Guys are, because of the flame and because of the heat. I know my God, and I can face this, and I can do this, and I can walk towards death confidently and in power. Because I know who God is, and I'd rather please him, and I'd rather die pleasing him than give in and serve you. So they walk to their death because God is able, but even if he's not, they say, even if he doesn't, even if we get fired, even if we get made fun of, even if these negative things happen in our life, I want you to know I'm going to live my life a certain way. And I'm going to live my life by the way the Bible tells me to live. I don't care if you agree. I don't care if you understand it. This is how I'm going to choose to live my life, even if he doesn't. Verse 18, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty. Again, respect, but we want to make it clear to you, boss, employees, co-workers. We want to make it clear to you that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've set up. The gold statue could be success, could be title, could be retirement account. It could be anything that we serve, that we want to get, that we want to achieve, that we want to establish, we want to have. It could be a house, it could be a car, it could be a boat, it could be a camper, it could be a motorcycle, it could be whatever. I want you to know, King, we're going to do this God's way. Consequences come what may. There's a old saying I've heard a long time ago that I love. There's never the right time to do the wrong thing. There is never a right time to do the wrong thing. And we can say, well, if I don't do this, my boss will write me up. If I don't do this, the boss will dock my pay. If I don't do this, the boss may fire me. If I don't do this, there's never the right time to do the wrong thing. It's bad language and it's wrong. It's not, pardon my French. Nope, not going to do it. I'm not going to pardon your French because it's not French. You're swearing. And well, it's only, well, I have to. My boss makes me. Who's your boss? Who's your boss? Told you I was going to meddle. And I'm not sorry. Who do you worship? The fire of life and the fires that we go through can be incredibly difficult, and they can be terribly terrifying because we don't know the outcome. We don't know what's going to happen. If we continue on this course of action, if we continue to say, I'm going to honor God with my life, we don't know what other people are going to do, what other people are going to say. We can assume it's going to be bad, and that's a generally good assumption. Because most people don't live this way. Most people don't understand it. But are you going to do it because it's what's right? Are you going to do it because it's what God's called us to? Are you going to do it because it's what the Bible teaches us? And we leave the consequences up to God. And if we honor him, we know that he will honor us. Again, we don't know what that's going to look like. We don't know how we're going to come out of that. But we can know and we can be certain that God is in control and that God is sovereign and that we can trust him. And that when we come through it, we will be purer. We will be cleaner because the stuff, the crap. Can I say crap in church? Sorry, I don't want to offend any, I don't want to offend anybody. Barb says it's okay. I'll throw her under the bus. No. We get rid of all that stuff. Shouldn't we want that? Shouldn't we desire that? To be more like Jesus? To look more like him? To live more like him? To act more like him? To do that, we've got to go through the fire. We've got to go through the fire. We're going to close. And I just want you to spend some time as we sing. The altar's open, obviously, always. The altar's open if you want to come and pray. But I want you to, things you're struggling with, the things you're hurting, or the decisions you need to be making, are they honoring to God? Do you need to say, you know what? No matter what, this is how I'm going to live my life. Do you need to make some changes? Remember, fire is a good thing. Fire reveals. Fire reveals. Allow God to work that fire in your life to reveal who he is in you and worship him. So let's sing this together.